Hi, folks. We're Tacitus today. Tacitus today, your pushback channel. And thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about President Trump's announcement of a new class of American battleship. Now, without knowing, and they'd be silly to disclose it all, but without knowing the full sort of technological specs, if you like, of a battleship, you'd have to wonder why, without radical reimagining and redesigning of what a battleship does and how it does it, it seems difficult to imagine how this could be a battle-winning sort of piece of kit for any military, let alone the US military. It just creates a bigger target. It's a huge, expensive thing that all you need is one drone to get through a protective net, and that could be enough to sink the battleship. Do you want a $2,000 drone to sink a multi-billion-dollar battleship, and without, so what are you accomplishing? So let's just have a look at this idea of military technology and its deployment. Now, the battleship played a significant role in naval warfare and the ability to project power wherever you wanted, whenever you wanted to do it. Now, if we look at the Vikings, for example, they were able to have a bunch of ships arrive with a lot of military dudes on board. And from the time they were sighted off the coast of, say, England at the time, Scotland around there, from the time they were sighted off the coast, it would only be hours before they were on the shore and running around rampaging and pillaging and so on. So there was, given the sparse and dispersed populations of the day and the lack of standing armies and things like that, it could take a long time before the local area could get together enough people with military experience or even able to use a bow and arrow or something like that. It would take a long time to get those together to mount a successful defense. So because the projection of power was sudden, concentrated and intense, they were able to take over vast areas of France, England, Scotland, the island areas around the Atlantic there, because of that ability to project power, concentrated and instant. Now, this was the same. This is why the British Navy was so successful in its operations around the globe, which turned Britain into a global power, initially mercantile, but later on a military power. That ability to concentrate intense concentration of power, cannons and soldiers and Marines and goodness knows what, concentrate that power quite quickly in any given area of their choice, and without the other side knowing where that strike would be, where that power would be concentrated. So it's very difficult to mount a coordinated, cohesive defense against that again, intense concentration of power that can arrive anywhere at any time. Now, the various places tried to say, well, we know that there's going to be an attempt to attack this area, so we'll build a fort and put lots of cannons in there. There were those sorts of things. But if the enemy lands somewhere a few miles down the road and then marches some soldiers up there, then you've got to have a big fort, very expensive, lots of cannons, cannonballs, people know how to operate it, gunpowder at the ready, and then soldiers as well. This is all hugely expensive, whereas the ability to concentrate, again, intense power can be done relatively cheaply, and it can be applied anywhere at any time. So the battleship was really and for some, if you look at the 7 Years' War in the 1750s, the Napoleonic Wars, Battle of Trafalgar, and really all the way up to the early 1900s, the battleship was really the battle-winning deployment of military power and projection of power. Now, things began to change. Two things. Firstly, submarine technology was developed, which meant that this hugely expensive battleship. Bear in mind that the dreadnought class of battleship in Britain, the dreadnought class, which was when it was first conceived, was the most advanced battleship technology at the time. It was put on the water. There were other more advanced designs floating around, but the dreadnought was the first on the water, as I understand it. That cost, give or take, back in the day, this is $5 million, which the British politicians, there were British politicians that were fainting in Parliament at the idea of this huge ticket price. This was in the conversion from steam to oil and petroleum powered vessels. So, but at the same time as the dreadnought class, which was a formidable battleship, by the way, was hitting the water, also submarine technology was really coming into its own. Early days, of course, but nonetheless. So it's quite possible for a submarine that was 1/25th of the cost of a battleship, for example, could sink the battleship quite easily without it being in danger itself, and then could sail off and all could survive on the submarine, and they've sunk this hugely expensive battleship. So the battleship has to be, and also air power was coming in, the very rudimentary first aeroplanes, and torpedoes launched from airplanes, things like this were all coming into their own, and this meant that the battleship needed a lot of protection. It needed protection against submarines or small torpedo boats even, and it needed protection against aircraft attack. So the battleship was now quite a vulnerable, very expensive, and if it could get to concentrate its power, its huge guns and that sort of thing, if it get to concentrate that, yes, it would be formidable, but it had to be able to be deployed and get to its area of deployment to use that great power that it had. And otherwise, it's quite vulnerable to submarine attack. It was vulnerable to air attack, and so it needed a lot of protection. Also, it needed a lot of redesign. Anti-aircraft guns. Later on in World War II, sonar and so on. Now, this meant that not only was the battleship now could still be a decisive piece of kit, but it also meant that the battleships needed some very expensive and quite a wide net of protection. It needed smaller escort vessels to go chasing the submarines. The submarines would only reluctantly engage, try and take a shot at a battleship, or the submarines would have to launch a torpedo from so far out that the accuracy in it was minimal, and it could be seen coming by the escort vessels, all these sorts of things. So, in the case of air attack by aircraft either dropping bombs or dropping torpedoes from a distance off, then it needed protection there, and therefore it needed air cover. It needed other planes to protect it, which of course was the aircraft carrier and protecting the battleship. So now the battleship has gone from being a decisive, directly deployable military asset to being a military asset that can only be deployed if it's heavily protected by aircraft carriers, smaller escort vessels, and so on. So this totally changed the type of deployment and really the overall expense of deployment. If your battleship is a decisive battle-winning weapon, bear in mind, it can shoot. Back in the day, it could shoot, shells over the horizon and all this sort of stuff. So it was again formidable kit in its day. But if it requires that much protection and that much, a net of again other kit and equipment around it, then it ceased to be a directly deployable battle-winning weapon, but one really can only be deployed under certain conditions and circumstances. Now the battleship isn't any cheaper, and it's got to be kitted up with anti-aircraft guns and all these sorts of things, but it's got to also have now all this protection around it. And that's also expensive in putting together. Again, escort vessels, aircraft carriers, and so on. Now, as World War II illustrated, no matter even the advanced technology battleships of the day, the Repulse and the Prince of Wales, they were sunk by just a few Japanese bombers. The Japanese lost nothing. It cost them nothing to sink Britain's two most advanced technological battleships in off the coast of Malaysia and near Singapore and around there. Now the ships were frantically zigzagging. They had anti-aircraft guns. They had probably not enough in the anti-aircraft gun area, but they didn't have air support, and they should have had air support. An aircraft carrier was sent with them, but the aircraft carrier got damaged and had to stop back around India for repairs. But Winston Churchill was urging the destroyers to go on to do a show of force. But without air cover, they were next to useless. Not only were they unable to deploy their decisive power, which had they arrived at the right place at the right time, they probably could have. But without air cover, they were just nothing. They were, they had no power and no deployable power. And again, just a few Japanese bombers, sunk them without loss, showing just how exposed and how pointless battleships were unless they had the proper structural support. And in today's technology of mass drones, very expensive battle tanks that again can be decisively deployed at the right juncture. They can be swarmed by drones and easily taken out. So for less than $20,000, given that some drones get shot down, but for $20,000, you can take out a multi-million-dollar battle tank on the battlefield, and the same would apply for battleships. Mass drone strike. Okay, even if you get half the drones, you get 3/4 of the drones that are coming in. All you need is one or two, and the battleship's sunk. So how can a battleship be deployed today? Air cover isn't going to be enough. Escort vessel cover isn't going to be enough. In these days of drone warfare, or even laser strikes from satellites in space, all these sorts of things, they're drastically changing the technological structure of warfare. So battleships, even if they're heavily kitted up and they've got missiles that can be shot from all over the world, these sorts of things, which I assume they will have. But how do you protect that? How do you keep it in battle-ready condition against massed swarming drone strikes? And these drones could be submarine drones. They could be, aerially delivered drones. They, what is it? What radar is going to pick those up? Can they be neutralized in like an electrical force field type thing that a shot can have I've forgotten the name of it now, but a shot can be put on a car, a vehicle, or some electronic device to disable its electrics. Is that something that will be delivered on a mass scale to disable mass drones? What other technology is that? Now, there's no doubt it'll be technologically advanced and it'll have all sorts of kick-ass kit on it. But it comes back to the same thing, that how is that super expensive, but battle decisive if it can get into position? How is that battleship going to be protected and protected again from drone swarms and so on? And how can it then not only neutralize an attack, but how can it then counterattack the source of the drone delivery or the drone drone control center and so on? All these are going to need to be questions that are going to be answered if this new class of battleship is to be decisive in its delivery. Now, if there's some sort of incredible new design that reduces the cost of the battleship, so it becomes a high-speed destroyer class, sort of with battleship capability, a bit like the pocket battleships that the Germans were doing in World War II, the Graf Spee and so on. Is it going to be that? So it becomes a semi-expendable asset in as much as it'll be such a large fleet of these out there that you can afford to lose a lot of them, but still deliver decisive power to the point of victory. We'll see. You've been with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for listening.